Lumix has been around since 2008 with the original camera being released, the G1. A little less than a year later, in 2009, the GH series with the GH1 was released. And ever since then, the cameras have grown more and more in numbers and sizes. Then cameras like the GH5 came and it was a fan favorite between a ton of different creators. Now, as brands like Sony and Canon started going into full frame lines, Lumix was still trying to make their Micro Four Third camera stay alive. And that was with the year and a half ago with the release of the GH6. It could have been the camera that was the perfect content creator camera, but there was one big flaw: autofocus.
And unfortunately, it still looks bad, in my opinion, on the GH6.
With the lack of phase detect autofocus, this seemed like this was it for Lumix Micro Four Third cameras. But there is hope. The Lumix G9 Mark II just a few months ago got announced and released, being the first Micro Four Third camera from Lumix with phase detect autofocus. But the real question is, what will end up destroying Micro Four Third cameras? How has it been surviving so far? And what does Lumix need to do to make it thrive and grow in the future? And at the end of this video, I'm going to be giving Lumix themselves 4 things that they need to do to make their camera systems thrive and grow in the future. And before I get into the rest of this kind of video, I do want you guys to know that I'm a huge Micro Four Third lover, so I'm not trying to hate on Micro Four Third cameras. I absolutely love them. I still use the GH6 and the G9 Mark II, mostly as B cams on sets, but I still use them as like travel cameras and different things like that. So I want to get that out of the way. I still love Micro Four Third cameras and I'm still a huge fan of them. These are just some points I want to touch point on and bring to light. Now, what has kept this sensor size alive as long as it has been? The truth is, it's going to be coming down to the community and the fan base of Lumix Micro Four Third cameras. People like Emily, Caleb, myself, and other YouTubers who are just absolutely huge fans of Micro Four Third cameras. And there's a ton of other fans of this system. People like having smaller lenses and more compact cameras to make it easier to travel with a wide variety of versatility. But the current consumer of Micro Four Third cameras isn't the new buyer looking into buying new camera systems. So if you already own a ton of Micro Four Third camera lenses, it makes sense to continue buying Micro Four Third cameras because those are the lenses you invested in. Now at this point, you might be wondering, what will end Lumix Micro Four Third cameras? And it's 2 words: full frame. Now, okay, first off, before you start roasting me in the comments below and telling me all your thoughts about full frame cameras, just give me the next minute or so to kind of explain what I mean. Now, I'm not talking about full frame cameras from Canon, Sony, Blackmagic, Fuji, or even Nikon if you're shooting on a potato, but I'm talking about full frame cameras from actually Lumix themselves. That's what's going to end up destroying or stopping Micro Four Third cameras. And let me explain a little bit deeper. Once the G9 Mark II got announced, that camera came around that $2,000 price point, and obviously it has a bunch of amazing specs. But when you get to the point and you're looking to get into a camera system and you're willing to spend $2,000, you start expecting more and more from the camera. Now, the issue isn't how many specs is in the camera, because the G9 Mark II has a ton of specs like 4K, 120 frames a second, 1080, 240, and the list goes on and on. Like, most consumers are going to want to match that quality in the glass. You can get vintage lenses and cheap lenses, but are you really wanting to buy a $2,000 camera body to fit a $100 lens? And there's nothing saying there's wrong with a $100 to $200 lens, but when you do want to put a higher piece of glass in front of your lens to get the most out of it, that's where the issue starts coming in. You can get the Lumix 10 to 25 f1.7, which in full frame terms, that's more like a 20 to 50 mil f3.4 with the light of an f1.7, but that's $1,500. Or on a full frame camera shooting on the Lumix S5 IIX, you can get the Sigma 24 to 70 f2.8, which will be costing about $1,100. So saving you almost $400, but getting a full frame look, getting the full frame bokeh, getting the full frame benefits of low light. That's where the issue starts coming in. Yeah, so while you can argue that Micro Four Third lenses are a lot smaller than full frame lenses, let's take another look at that. So Lumix just announced this lens right here. This is gonna be the 28 to 200 mil f4 to 7.1 lens. This is significantly small for a full frame lens that can basically do it all. Now, let's do a semi-equivalent lens. This is the 12 to 60 mil lens for Micro Four Third cameras. This is an f2.8 to f4. Now, not in terms of light, but in terms of bokeh only, this is more equivalent to an f5.6 to an f8 in terms of bokeh, but not light. It's still an f2.8 to an f4. And the 12 to 60 in full frame terms, it's more like a 24 to 120. Yes, this lens is slightly heavier than the Micro Four Third lens, but the biggest thing is these lenses are almost the exact same size. And that's where the big kicker comes in. Not only does this take up the same amount of size in your bag, it's covering more distance with this lens, but both of these lenses cost the exact same. So when you're wanting to buy a Lumix full frame camera or a Micro Four Third camera, if you end up buying a full frame camera, these lenses are the exact same price. The camera bodies are very similar in prices, but with full frame, you're gonna be getting all the full frame benefits like better low light performance, better bokeh. Meanwhile, if you buy the same price point for a Micro Four Third camera, you do miss out on those benefits, but you get those in the camera specs. Now, another little hot take opinion on this area. One thing that I wish Lumix was able to make, but I think the barrel distance between the sensor and the mount itself is not big enough, is an Micro Four Third to L mount adapter, which I think would just be a nice way to buy L mount lenses, put it on your Micro Four Third camera, and be able to use L mount Lumix lenses on both your Micro Four Third and your full frame cameras. But that's not possible at this current time, which would be really, really nice. So if you do want to use the exact same lenses on both your Micro Four Third and your full frame camera, then probably should get an EF adapter and use EF lenses. Now, with all that said, this doesn't mean this is the end for Lumix Micro Four Third cameras though.
You don't say!
There's still a few advantages and a few recommendations I have to Lumix themselves on how to keep this camera system still alive. The first, a big advantage of Micro Four Third cameras right now is the community. The community is keeping the Micro Four Third camera systems well and alive because of all the fans that want to see Micro Four Third cameras succeed. The second big advantage is the size and space the sensor provides. Well, what I mean by that basically is the technology advancements they're able to put into Micro Four Third cameras going forward in the future can make them super crazy and super specced out. Now, the third big advantage that's worth marketing for Lumix is being able to buy full frame lenses for Micro Four Third cameras. It's kind of like future investing into your system. So buying different lenses or lens mounts and having the adapters to purchase full frame lenses. So when you want to move on to a full frame camera like the S5 IIX, you can get that same adapter and adapt to all your EF lenses that you already own. Now, with all of those three advantages for keeping Lumix camera systems alive, how can Lumix make their Micro Four Third cameras thrive and grow in the future? So let's start off with the first thing, lowering the prices. Now, it is cool that you can purchase, the G9 Mark II and the GH6 for that $1,000 to $1,500 used on the market, and sometimes even brand new on various different websites, which is really, really good. They just need to continue doing that with these newer camera systems, especially when camera companies like Sony are competing with Lumix in these smaller sensor ranges. They need to still make it worth buying a Micro Four Third lens and make it sense for the budget filmmaker. My second piece of advice for Lumix is make lower end and newer entry level cameras. It's absolutely amazing to get cameras like the G9 Mark II and the S5 IIX being these flagship cameras that have everything in it. That's what I want. That is the only camera I would shoot on. I would not get a new entry-level camera. But for the filmmakers that want to get into filmmaking and get into the Lumix ecosystem, they might not be wanting to spend $1,500 to $2,000+ on their first camera. They're looking at spending $500 to $1,000 maybe on their entire camera system. Now, there is definitely some cameras like the G7 or the GH5 that are still amazing cameras, but would you want to get a GH5 knowing that there's cameras with face detect autofocus under $1,000 from other competitors? So my personal recommendation here is make a camera like the G7 Mark II, a camera that has maybe 4K, 10-bit, 24 and 30 frames a second. Maybe it has phase detect, well, it definitely needs phase detect autofocus, has some level of IBIS, but don't go all out on the specs and try to keep it as small and compact as possible, which goes into my third reason, is make smaller bodies. Now, this is something I personally don't agree on, but I see a lot of people saying that the G9 Mark II and the GH6 are pretty hefty and big camera bodies, which I personally, again, I really like that. I just know from consumer standpoints, some people want that small camera that you can put different lenses on, and it's more of a point and shoot style. Again, I personally don't care about it because I like having bigger camera bodies, but it's definitely something to consider for, again, those entry level people, the new people that you want to bring in to the Lumix ecosystems. Now, my fourth piece of advice to Lumix themselves is get crazy experimental. Since this sensor size is so small, let the engineers go wild and put as many specs and features on the flagship cameras as possible. Go, 5.8K 60 frames a second, add 4K 240 frames a second. Do things that other companies and camera companies aren't doing in their smaller sensor size areas. Now, do I truly think that Lumix will stop creating Micro Four Third cameras? No, not at all. The reason they came out with the G9 Mark II with phase detect autofocus is because they are continuing to plan on investing into Micro Four Third cameras. There's definitely a huge fan base there and a huge community behind those camera systems. And even myself being a huge fan of them, we all want to see Lumix succeed and thrive in the future. The big thing that I personally hope for Lumix to do is make them more and more relevant, not to the current market, but to the new market of filmmakers in the future. Bring people into the Lumix ecosystems and make them understand why there's so many of us that love it. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to see me pit the Lumix S5 IIX versus the G9 Mark II, check out that video right here. And then YouTube recommends you might like this video right here. Until next week, guys, peace.